Hello, and welcome to today's program, Active Assailant Preparedness, Risks and Recommendations. I'm Jessica Pagel, Learning Program Director at ASIS, and today's host. We have a great program ahead, but first, a few housekeeping items. ASIS International acknowledges and thanks Everbridge for sponsoring today's webinar. Everbridge provides enterprise software applications that automate and accelerate organizations' operational response to critical events, such as active shooter situations, terrorist attacks, or severe weather conditions, as well as critical business events, including IT outages, cyber attacks, or supply chain operations. Everbridge has helped manage critical events for 5,600 plus customers globally, reaching more than 700 million people in over 200 countries, reservations, and territories. For more information, visit everbridge.com. Centered on your screen are the presentation slides. To the left of the slides is the media player, where you should see today's presenters. Closed captioning can be enabled from the media player module. Find the closed captioning icon in the lower right corner and click to enable. Directly below the media player is the Ask a Question module. Should you have a question for the panel during the presentation, type it there, and we'll address it during Q&A at the end as time permits. To the right of the slides, you'll find webinar materials and resources, including today's presentation slides, as well as other items you may find useful. Should you experience any sound or audio disruption during the webinar, please refresh your browser. If additional help or support is needed, click the question mark icon at the bottom of your screen. Completion of this webinar is eligible for 1 CPE credit. CPE credit will be updated directly into your user profile within 48 hours after the webinar's conclusion. At the bottom of your screen is the navigation bar to access speaker biographies, as well as additional tools, resources, and programs. Hover and click to explore more. Today's presentation is being recorded and will be made available on demand within 48 hours. Thank you again for joining today's webinar, Active Assailant Preparedness, Risks and Recommendations, sponsored by Everbridge. I'd now like to welcome today's moderator, Scott Briscoe, Content Development Director at ASIS. Scott, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jessica. As Jessica said, my name is Scott Briscoe, and I'll be moderating. I was in charge of this project for ASIS International, but I had a lot of help. And so kind of want to start there and first of all, thank Everbridge for their financial and really intellectual contributions to the survey. We couldn't have done it without them. And we're very proud of the results from this survey. And with that, I want to ask each of the presenters to kind of just give a quick bio of themselves. And we'll start with you, Drew.
Thanks, Scott. I'm Drew Necker. I am the principal consultant for CoSecure Enterprise Risk Solutions. We're a security consulting firm that works across a number of different industries. Prior to starting a career as a consultant, I led security programs in a few different industries: healthcare, higher education, financial services, and nightclubs. So I have a lot of experience dealing with active shooter preparedness and actually some experience dealing with near misses of close events. So looking forward to today's webinar.
Thank you, Drew. Appreciate that. Pamela, let's go to you next.
Thank you, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here today with you and Drew and Jean and everybody who's on this, attending this webinar. So I am Pamela Larson. I am the Chief Security Officer for North America at Everbridge. I joined Everbridge, well, 3 months ago. And I came from Twilio, which is a software company. Prior to that, I'd been there for almost 2 years as a Director of Corporate Security, Strategy, Risk, and Compliance. And then prior to moving over to the technology industry, I have almost 20 years, I guess I'd call it, in the financial industry. So having been at Bank of the West as the Chief Security Officer, and then also at Wells Fargo as the Head of Enterprise Incident Management. So I've dealt with these types of situations, workplace violence incidents, active shooter. And so I'm looking forward to today's conversation and talking through the results of this survey.
Great, thank you. And Jean, bring us home.
Hey everybody, Gene Petrino. I am the co-founder of Survival Response and the principal security consultant for the company. Prior to creating this company, I was in law enforcement for 26 years. With a good portion of that, I was the SWAT commander and was a primary trainer for active shooter incidents and things like that. I was one of the tactical teams that was involved in the Fort Lauderdale Airport shooting incident. So I've got some real world experience with this. I've also a published author regarding these incidents. So very excited to be here today and discuss this with you guys.
Thank you, Gene. And so just to go over what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to spend a little bit of time on just what this survey was, who it went out to, and that sort of thing. And then we're going to jump into some benchmarks related to active assailant preparedness. And finally, we're going to take a look at where the survey data show the factors that really make a difference in terms of the confidence that security professionals have in their active assailant preparedness. I'll also note that we will be having a full report on the results of this survey. It will be ready in the days ahead. Everybody who registered for this webinar will be sending you a link to that as soon as it's available. And so the survey itself, we got 700 or so responses. It was fielded in June and July of 2024, promoted primarily to ASIS members and customers, and as well as some Everbridge contacts. And I think one thing to keep in mind there is that most of the people who answered the survey are those ASIS members or Everbridge contacts. And they knew that it was going to be an active assailant preparedness survey. So all of that factors into the idea, at least, that these people are probably a little more knowledgeable about active assailant things than just the regular or the average, if you will, if such a thing exists, security professional. I also want to point out that we fielded very similar surveys in 2020 and 2023 so that we can take a look at some benchmarks and how they have changed over the years. The people who filled in the survey, there's 3 slides here from demographics, or 3 charts here for demographics, location, title, and number of employees. Really, the point I want to make is that the demographics of this survey mirror the survey demographics of most of the surveys that we've run in the past year and a half, 2 years. They're all going to be within this, have similar numbers to this. And taking a look at the 2020 and 2023 demographics, they also kind of fall along this. And I guess another factor to consider to show that this is kind of a representative sample is that these numbers, while not exact, do come close to the overall kind of ASIS membership and the type of firms that they come from, their titles, and where they are in the world. And so we're going to start by asking you guys to answer a couple of polls, a couple of poll questions, just to kind of get you thinking about where you are in your active assailant preparedness. And we'll start with this one. Has your organization experienced any of the following in the past 5 years? For as long as you've worked there, if less than 5 years, and you can select all of them that apply. So please go ahead and fill that in and send it to us. And as you're filling it in, I wanted to ask Pamela, Everbridge has been working with ASIS on learning more about active assailant preparedness for several years. And so I wanted to ask you, why is researching on this topic important?
Yeah, it's definitely an important topic for all of us, because with the research, we're learning, so much that on a daily basis. I think it doesn't take much for us to read about the threats, whether it be an active shooter or workplace violence incident. They're pervasive across all types of organizations, whether we're talking about our schools, our workplaces, our houses of worship, as well as now public venues. We're starting to see that as well. So I think the research studies, such as the one we're going to review today specifically, as well as prior research when there's lessons learned from those who've experienced an active shooter situation, those add value for all of us to provide that knowledge. It helps us guide the plans that we put together, also our processes and our training that is so necessary to ultimately respond in such an event and such an incident. So I think over the years, for me specifically, it's also helped build that preparedness program to really give us more capabilities, not only to be proactive, but also for prevention and early detection, as well as those training programs that we, lead our employees, our team members, our students, faculty, whatever it is that we're working with, we lead them through to build a more resilient response, and then also create a safer work environment.
Great, thank you, Pamela. So I'm seeing a lot of participation. This is your last chance. Fill it in now and hit submit, because I am moving forward to the results. So really quickly, just looking at this, I'm seeing that's 8%. That's going to be interesting as we move forward on this. We're gonna show you what came out of this when we asked the question of the survey participants, and I'm seeing things that are very similar in terms of numbers, incredibly similar actually. Thank you for filling in that poll. We're going to go ahead and ask the next poll question now. How confident are you that your organization is prepared for an active assailant incident? When we asked this question in the survey, we had numbers attached to it instead of the letters there, but it's, choose 1 to 5. 1 is not at all confident, 2 somewhat confident, 3 medium level of confidence, 4 mostly confident, and 5 highly confident. And while you're filling this in, please fill it in, hit the submit button. I wanted to bring Jean in, who's had a chance to look at some of the data from the survey, and just wanted to, we're going to be delving into the findings here, but wanted you to give kind of your overall impressions of some of the things that you were seeing.
Yeah. So overall, I was excited to see a lot of the responses were, in my opinion, positive. The fact that workplace violence and active assailant incidents were still top of mind was really important to me. And the other thing that I thought was kind of encouraging was a lot of the response, I think it was in the 70 percentile of the respondents, said that they have an early warning system, a communication system set up, which is really, it's vital when you're trying to deal with these incidents as far as, from a management style, and really it saves lives getting that early notification out. So that to me, those really were the 2 highlights that I found were very valuable in the survey.
All right, thank you, Gene. And so last chance, I'm going to be hitting the forward button. Here we go. Let's take a look at these results, see how confident you all are. All right. Drew, as you take a look at the poll results, I'm seeing things that are kind of fairly similar to a lot of the things that we found as we were surveying folks back in June and July. What are your thoughts on kind of how people have filled out these polls?
Yeah, looking at the audience polls, this one in particular, I'm not that surprised that there's, close to 50% or a little over 50% that are not at all confident or somewhat confident in their ability to respond. I mean, I think from my personal experience, you don't know what's going to happen until it happens, and you can put as many things in place as you can, but you still have that little bit of concern over that. Going back to the first question, I did note that of the audience, 8% of those who answered the poll have had a fatality related to workplace violence in their workplace. And that's, well, not surprising, it's unfortunate. But what we also do see is that significantly more, nearly double, have had hospitalizations or other injuries occurring. So I think those are notable. And the fact that we have that large a percentage of the attendees, and I think that reflects kind of the overall state of the industry and state of different industries across the US, that there are incidents occurring and people are getting injured due to workplace violence and are dying due to workplace violence, even though active shooter is what hits the news. It's much more common for other types of workplace violence. We have to be prepared for them all. The other piece I see out of this is that nearly 20% of the respondents have mitigated what would have been an incident with their, I'm assuming, based on things they've put in place with their security program. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But I think that is the key. It's getting to it and getting what people refer to as left of bang before the bad thing happened, and stopping it and identifying it then. So we'll talk about that more going on, but I think that's key, and that's something I like to pull out of all of these.
Thank you very much, Drew. So moving on, as we dig into some of the findings from the survey, we kind of have a little bit of good news, bad news going on, and you'll see that these questions are related to the poll questions that you just answered. If you look at the choices here, the good news is that incidents seem to be down. So take this with a grain of salt to a degree. It is 1 year's data. It is encouraging because, for one thing, this kind of mirrors some of the things that we were seeing in both how you responded, but also in other ways as well. We do know that in the U.S., for example, violent crime is down. We won't have workplace violence numbers for quite some time for anything. I think the most recent ones are from 2022. So it may be a little while before we can corroborate this. But the fact that all of them are going down is encouraging. But flip that to the bad news portion. Again, these should look familiar to you. About a quarter of about a third of folks, a little bit more than a third of folks, are in that not at all confident or somewhat confident, and more are less. We would like to see more in that medium level or mostly confident range. And I want you to pay kind of particular attention to that question. As you know, security can be really hard to measure hard results, to measure progress and things like that. So one of the things we do in the survey is we ask about a bunch of different factors that people either have in place or could have in place. And then we also ask this type of confidence question to see how those factors, when they are in place, if that affects the confidence level that security professionals have. And so as we move forward and start looking at some of those, how effective some of those measures are, we do break these, and I broke these into two different components. People that answered mostly and highly confident as one side, and everybody else, the mediums, somewhat, and not at all confident, on the other side, to kind of measure that confidence. So we'll take another look at that moving forward. And then so Gene, I know when you first look at this, I think everybody sees the 16% that's not at all confident, and that's a little bit concerning. But I know that the first thing that stuck out to you was that 11% who were highly confident. So why was that sticking out to you?
Well, anyone that's ever been involved in either as a unfortunate participant or someone who's had to manage any kind of critical incident, especially an active assailant incident, they know the fact is that everything that you have planned probably is not going to go as planned. These are very dynamic environments. Things are constantly changing, and as much preparation as you do, you're just not going to, it's just going to be controlled chaos, to be honest with you. So I get a little concerned when I see people saying that they're highly confident, because that overconfidence really can be a detriment in managing and responding. If you think that you know everything, the truth is, you don't. These are very complex situations, and they're, like I said, they're very fluid, and it's very hard to respond to these things. So saying you're highly confident, almost is setting yourself up for failure. There's always going to be room to improve. The 16% of not at all confident, that's honesty, and that to me is it's not a great number. However, they're honest about that they're not confident, and even doing these surveys, that might be enough to spur them into action and say, wow, we didn't really think that we were about this. Now we know we're not prepared. But those that feel that they're highly confident, I would recommend taking a step back and really examining it, because you really don't know what you don't know until it happens, and it gets pretty challenging. Drew, I think you're on, or Scott, I think you're on mute.
I knew that was going to happen to somebody. I'm sorry that it happened to me. Anyway, we're going to look at some benchmarks. I'm probably going to fly through this pretty quickly. Don't worry, the slide deck is in your resources. And like I said, we'll be emailing the full report out to you, or a link to it when it is done. So we asked security professionals about to rank their top 3 security priorities from a list of 12 priorities. And you'll see that active shooter here is about 42% in this survey. And you'll notice that I put 4 bars in orange. Just wanted to call out that those 4, workplace violence, cybercrime, active shooter, and theft of physical property, those are the top 4 in every survey that we do, in every active assailant survey we've done over the years. You can see that the percentages change a little bit, and the actual order changes a little bit, but those 4 are consistently across. And just one thing to note: these are statistics. This is a survey. It has a margin of error of plus or minus 4%. So when you look at 2024 at active shooter, what that really means, and the way you should read it is somewhere between 38% and 46% listed it as one of their top priorities. And so, for example, in 2023, that would be 47% to 55%. Those things almost overlap. So all of these numbers are really kind of statistically either the same or very, very close to it. But the point is, these 4 always rise to the top. A couple more signs of the importance of active assailant preparedness. We asked if it was discussed at the board level, and 57% said that it was. Are executives more or less concerned about it than they were 2 years ago? 56% said that they were. Again, if we were to put up the numbers from the 2023 and 2020, it would look very similar, as all of these numbers would be within the margin of error. So this is pretty consistent through the years, that it is discussed at the board level at more than half of organizations, and that it seems to always grow in importance. And surely it doesn't always grow, but I think that just shows that it is emphasized by executives quite regularly. And so I wanted to pause here and just ask Pamela, why is it important that an organization's leaders be engaged on the topic of active assailant preparedness?
Yeah, I think, leadership engagement is so vital to any organization being prepared for anything. And ultimately, I think having their involvement is what fosters more of that proactive organizational culture. It's also, I think, we talk about tone at the top, or having that engagement from the top down helps everybody understand where the importance is for this type of, active assailant preparedness, workplace violence. So, I mean, talking about leadership, obviously there's multiple levels. Typically, we think about the board level, your executive levels, and then there's the leadership level of departments. But kind of looking at these results, and the board specifically, I think that their engagement is so important, because whether it's the board or your executive teams, they're typically the ones that are responsible for the allocation of resources. They're also the ones that are deciding what is important and critical to the organization through corporate goals. And ultimately that gives them the capability to have that awareness, or the prime opportunity for enhancement of security awareness, whether it be for active assailant, workplace violence at the company, and helps to enforce also policies that, get us focused towards this. And, I know that we've talked about it, we can have these plans in place, but it is controlled chaos when it starts to happen. But knowing that our executives are behind us when it's happening, it's so vital to have their engagement.
Great, thanks, Pamela. We also asked folks, and this harkens back to that poll question that we asked all of you, and the reason why, for example, we didn't when we're looking at the comparison through years, the workplace violence resulting in a fatality, we didn't ask that. We didn't have that answer choice exactly the same in previous years' questions, nor did we have the none of the above. So when you were looking at that line chart before, we focused on the ones that asked the question in the same way and had the exact same answer responses. But you can see really this mirrors very well the way that that you guys filled out the poll here, all of the attendees here. Yeah, and I think, you know, I think this kind of speaks for itself in terms of where things are. 50% not experiencing any, and again, that was exactly the results that that came through with the poll. From here, we're going to jump into some of the factors that change the confidence professionals have in their active assailant preparedness, starting with overall planning. And it almost is a no-brainer that obviously overall, you know, if you plan for something that that you are gonna feel like you are more prepared for it. But let's take a look at the numbers anyway. So we asked the specific question: does your organization have a comprehensive response plan in place for active assailant? 60% did. 25% said that they did not and do not plan to have one. And no plans to develop one, and 14%, I'm sorry, got that backwards. 25% plan to develop one, and 14% say that they do not have any plans to develop one. And so I wanted to ask Pamela, you again, for those people without a plan, that 4 in 10 that don't have a plan right now, where would you tell them to start?
I think it starts with creating a team, and it's a cross-functional team that, you know, depending on how an organization terms it, whether it be a working group, a steering committee, whatever is the norm in that organization, but to get that engagement cross-functionally and from the stakeholders and your partners, I think from typical, like working on these in the past, typically you're seeing engagement from your HR partners, your facilities or real estate partners, your legal, privacy, compliance, as well as communications across, you know, working with the security team to write these kind of plans, because it is not a silo. It's not, you know, security does not sit on an island by themselves and have to write these plans and enforce the plans and respond. It is an organizational cross-functional effort that takes place. And it is through that type of team, you're going to get the holistic approach. They're going to be able to provide the gaps and the risks that they see from their vantage point, specifically as to what may be missing. And I think the other part I would say is, you know, looking at external resources such as these kind of surveys and things like that, but also reaching out to, you know, law enforcement or emergency services, and even subject matter expert consultants can help develop these plans the right way for a company if you don't have one, because they're going to be able to bring that broader view in than just being specific to one company, and you know, highlighting those critical components that are necessary and best practices to build a plan easily and make it more effective when you do have to respond and people understand what it's like. But, you know, once the plan is created, I mean, that's where it moves into socializing and training and all the other things that go with it. But definitely, from where I come from, it's not something that has to be done solely by security. It's a cross-functional effort to get these plans going. So start that conversation across an organization.
Love that. You know, nobody's on an island. Got to find your resources and use them. So thank you for that. All right, we're going to take a look at the effectiveness measure again. It is a no-brainer that if you have a plan, you're probably going to be more confident. And if you remember, I divided things from into 2 categories: highly or mostly confident. and medium level somewhat or not at all. And so people with a plan, the 60%, roughly 60% that had a plan, 56% of them were either highly or mostly confident. Those that either did not have a plan, whether or not they were planning on developing one, they were all lumped together, that 40%. Only 9% of them thought that they were highly or mostly confident. And again, it's a no-brainer. If you plan for it, you're going to be more confident. What I want to point to is and this is a style of chart that you're going to see for the rest of the presentation. And what I want to point to is just the difference in those numbers. It is highly significant. We've been doing this for a number of these types of issues research surveys now, and this is by far the biggest delta, the biggest difference in how confident people are based on the things. And that's going to be throughout. It's not just that they have a plan one. All the other ones that we're going to look at are the same way. If you have these things, you are more confident in your ability to handle the situation. Jumping forward to one more kind of measurement of this planning, we asked folks what actions they had taken to prepare for active assailant, and just throwing it out there, the training, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, is up there. Increased on-site security is an interesting one, and a number of things. But I wanted to bring Drew in here. When you think about what is important when it comes to preparing for an active assailant, what stands out as a method or approach that is most important, that makes the biggest difference?
Yeah, Scott. One of the things I like to, when I was internal and the director of security for organizations, talk to my board of directors, my C-suite about, and as a consultant, talk to my clients about, is we all want to talk about active shooter because it's in the news, we see it, it's a highly emotional issue. But active shooter is an extremely low probability event with a really high impact. So I don't like to see organizations concentrating purely on active shooter and letting that drive their security programs, which does often happen. What I like to see is that we can use those elements of those basic elements of a good security program to also decrease the likelihood and impact of an active shooter event. Everybody on the webinar, I'm sure, is ASIS members, so you're all very familiar with Security 101, but when I'm talking to non-security people, I pull out the good old 4Ds. First, we want to be able to deter a bad actor from doing something within our organization. We want to make it look difficult, or at least more difficult than the business down the road. If we can't deter them, we want to be able to detect what's going to happen before it gets bad or early on during the incident. Then we want to delay them from being able to do damage. And we want to be able to defend. So we have to have an effective response. And I think all of those elements also come to play in active shooter as well as all other security issues and security risks. So we definitely need early identification. We want to try to get left of bang before a person starts shooting. Once that first trigger pull happens, you're only mitigating damage. You're not stopping the incident. So we want to try to do that, whether it's threat assessment teams, whether it's active surveillance, whether it's employee awareness to identify suspicious behavior. All of those things can help us detect that before it occurs. Then we've got the target hardening and trying to locking doors, et cetera, helping people protect themselves once it does occur. And then we get to the point where we have to have an effective response. So I think those are all really important elements. And I think all of those fit into a holistic security program as well. And I think you can really build on that to increase active shooter. And frankly, unfortunately, with the amount of airtime active shooters get in the media, our boards of directors, our C-suites, our clients are really intent on what are we doing to keep safe from active shooter. But we can leverage that to protect our organizations from a myriad of different threats as long as we put those in. And I think one thing that I didn't call out in there, but is highly important, and I want to reemphasize, is training for employees and helping every employee understand what their role in the security program is and what they should do. So it's a basic see something, say something, and what is suspicious, and how do I notify somebody who can deal with it.
Thank you, Drew. Really appreciate that. We're going to jump into another factor now, communication. We asked several questions dealing with communication in the active assailant preparedness scenario. The obvious one, do you have a communications plan in place for active assailant incidents? A robust 3/4 do, so that's a great number to move forward with. We also asked specifically about emergency notification systems, asking first, do you have the technology? 68% said that they did, 17% said that they did not but plan to, and the rest do not have plans to add. Importantly, we asked how long it would take them to notify constituents. By constituents, we mean employees, students, whoever needs to be notified in such an incident. 23%, or about a quarter, said it would take seconds. Half said it would take minutes, and more than an hour. I'm not sure if that even means you have the capability, but we'll lump everybody else together as more than minutes. And finally, the frequency of emergency notification systems. Because if you have a system, you want to be able to test it. 41% test it more than once a year. A quarter test it annually, and then the rest of folks have no set schedule to test it. And so Gene, what are the important considerations for communications during an active assailant incident?
Oh, I mean, it's critical. The ability to notify, the people, whether employees or students in an organization, the sooner you can do it, the more lives you're going to save. So it's absolutely critical in these types of events.
And Pamela, you both work at Everbridge, but also have been in a CSO role. How difficult is it to implement an alerting communication system?
I would say that, adding these mass notification systems really is it's not any different than many of the other technology systems that our companies add in. I think the part is that, we have to remember it takes advanced planning. It's not something you can just, plug and play. There's a lot of planning and engagement has to go into it with the right teams early on. And I think that goes to, making sure that the right stakeholders are at the table with you. There's security and privacy reviews that have gone through, as well as you have a good change management process ready and structure ready to ensure that path forward is smooth. But I think it kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier about leadership, that first and foremost, where some of the difficulty comes in, is that you have to get the necessary funding and resources to implement the system. So from my own experience, resource allocation was usually the first blocker that I had to overcome. And that was about not only the cost of the system, but then if there was an additional add of full-time employees to be the ones that are using it and using it effectively on that part. But it really, having that data to show your leadership about the vulnerabilities and risks that we're facing if we cannot communicate in real time and effectively and efficiently with our employees when we need to, whether it be an active shooter or any type of emergency response whatsoever, that helps build that business case and show return on investment year over year. But another area where I've found implementation being a little bit more challenging is that if you don't go through those proper reviews. So there's a lot of need to understand, how does this system integrate with other systems, whether it be your own security systems, your HR platform, or IT systems as well. And so that's where your partners come in for those reviews, whether it be physical security or a cybersecurity, information security review, or you've got a privacy review, and then also business continuity reviewing these, because you want to make sure that not only is there a built-in redundancy if something else fails that may, downstream cause an impact to these types of systems, but also then making sure that the information feeds are protected, because typically you are maintaining PII and for your employees and contact information for them. So I think that's kind of core to it. But one of the things that, ensuring in this is the difficulty for implementation also comes back to, I would say, user adoption. So that's where building in that change management process is so critical in making sure that the right users have administrative privileges to use it the right way, to make changes to it, and you don't have unnecessary impacts from people who shouldn't be an administrator in there. And so that's kind of that rule-based access that you build into these systems. Really, it just comes back to, like I said, it's similar to many of the other systems that we put in. It's just making sure you're building it properly and then implementing it properly to limit those errors so that it's used on a consistent basis.
I think those are some great pointers. Thank you so much for that. We're going to quickly go through the effectiveness measures for that. Again, we're just looking at the difference here. This is whether or not you have that comprehensive communications plan. The difference is huge. It's 48% to 5% in terms of the confidence level. Again, you see a similar trend with the length of time it takes to notify the constituents. Seconds, it's 58%. You go down to minutes, it's 39. Folks who either don't know or it takes longer, it's 14%. Jumping ahead to the threat assessment teams is another one of those success factors. So we asked the questions: do you have the threat assessment team? 2/3 do. How's it managed? So this was an important one. How is it managed? About just over half have the cross-functional, it spans departments. 40% say it is just primarily a security function, and the rest say that it is managed outside, or primarily managed outside the security function. And this is also an effectiveness measure, kind of all on its own. That the last pie chart here on the right has that team presented a serious incident. 42% has. So that's it. Clearly shows that investments and time spent on threat assessment really work, really matter. And so Drew, if you could quickly give kind of a rundown of how to make threat assessment teams function effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And frankly, I'm a little surprised with the results here, especially that 65% of the respondents said their organization does have an active threat assessment team. While they're becoming more common, I don't see that large a percent of organizations. So I think that speaks to who our respondents were, because with our consulting clients and just in the industry at large, I would say it's significantly less than half the organizations I see are even aware of the concept. So the fact that the people who responded to the survey, 65% of them have something in place, is wonderful, and it's great. And I think the fact that it has prevented incidents for many of them is important. So to drive a threat assessment team, really the keys in my mind are having appropriate notification protocols and activation protocols for the team. So having the organization as a whole understand what is potentially a threat and how do I tell somebody who can do something about it. That's the first element. The second element is that team then needs to be multidisciplinary and have the right people at the table who can each judge the validity of a threat. So whether the person brought to the team is making threats or actually poses a threat, and being able to determine that and having the right people at the table to be able to do that is extremely important. I've seen some organizations that have created threat assessment teams, and it's been kind of a organizationally important thing to be on the threat assessment team. So you have 20, 30 people on the team, none of whom are contributing anything, but they can all say they're on the threat assessment team. Having a small focused team that can actually do that and assess and manage the threat, that's the third piece. I don't like referring to the threat assessment process just as threat assessment. I like to refer to it as threat assessment and management. So a threat assessment and management team, because yes, we can assess the threat, but then we need to manage that threat and pull that threat actor back down to their baseline behavior so they don't present as much of a threat. And that ongoing management can take years with someone. It can be something we look at and they peak, we mitigate. They peak, we mitigate. And that can go on for decades. But if you're missing that management piece, yes, you can say, yep, it's a threat. What are we going to do about it now? High level, that's the important pieces.
And so if you need any sort of motivation to think about your threat assessment teams, not just if you have them, think about how to make them more effective based on kind of what Drew was saying. This 40% is such a big number. 42% prevented a serious incident. That's significant. But if you need, we also have the effectiveness measure. You're also going to be a lot more confident that you're prepared as well if you have the threat assessment team. Next, we're going to look at training, and that's the last factor that we're looking at in terms of the how things affect the confidence levels of security professionals. We've seen this table before. It's the actions that people took, and I'm just highlighting the first one. I think either Gene or Drew highlighted that before. That 68%, almost 70%, do conduct active assailant training, which is a good number. And then we just as for benchmarking purposes, we asked if people trained on the run, hide, fight or the similar protocol. They call it something different in Europe. And more than 3/4 had actually trained on that specifically. We asked how often they run the drills. And you can see about 45% run them with some regularity, and just over half run them either with no set frequency or don't run them. We asked that 55% over here that do not run them, why? Why don't you run them? And the three most prominent reasons given were that they prepare for active assailants in other ways, other security priorities take precedence, or that they lack support from top management. Sorry, while we're looking at this, I wanted to Gene has a point that he's not a huge fan of live active assailant simulation training, and if you could just briefly tell us why you think that is, Gene.
Yeah, I mean, while this type of training is vital for law enforcement, first responders, there's really, in my opinion, not a lot of benefit for employees or even students. I think it causes more problems than anything else. You're trying to teach people to do these very complex things, and if you're not doing it frequently, you're not going to remember it, and it really ties up a lot of resources and money. And I think there's other ways that you can handle it. It's sort of like, if you go to take like a 4-hour self-defense course that they're offering for free somewhere, that night you're going to come back thinking you're Bruce Lee. Within a week, you're going to forget everything you learned. And it's the same concept with these trainings. And there's also been a lot of injuries that have happened with them, and lawsuits that have stemmed from not having proper trainers come in there and things like that. So I think there's better ways to do it, and that's essentially a tabletop situation. Is probably the best training method you can do.
And segueing right into Drew told me a story about a specific tabletop drill that he ran that illustrates why they're effective. So Drew, can you relay that again?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, it does segue really well off Gene's comment, because I don't think I mentioned this when we talked before, but this company that had asked me to run an active shooter drill for them had first asked for a live drill with law enforcement coming in and everything else. And I said, let's take it back about 4 steps. And first, let's do a tabletop drill just with the key players. And in reviewing that company's policy, it was a company with about 80 sites throughout the US, about 25,000 employees. And looking at their response plans, I identified very quickly that all of their response plans relied on 2 individual people. Their vice president of risk management or their vice president of support services. And so starting that drill out, we sat down at the table. I gave the group the scenario and said, these 2 individuals are on a flight from the home office to Europe, will not be available for 8 hours. And this is what's happening, go. And everyone kind of looked at each other, and there were no plans in place to do anything that did not rely on having one of those two individuals available. And just that piece identified that gap in their planning and was able to make a major impact in how they would respond.
That's a great story. Thank you. Thank you very much, Drew. We're just a very quick look at the effectiveness, a measure of the confidence level. You see that security professionals are roughly 40% more confident when they conduct these types of trainings than those who are not conducting the trainings. And with that, we're going to turn it over to some questions. We have some great questions that have come in, and I'm going to start with someone who says that in regards to board level participation, what strategies have you all seen that can be used to help promote active assailant preparedness with high level leadership or board level leadership? And since we heard from you a little bit already, Pamela, let me ask Drew if he could start with that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things security leaders should be very careful of is playing on emotions with that. It's very easy to do the knee jerk, especially when there's been an incident recently in the news and the board calls you up and says, oh my God, what are we doing to keep our people safe? It's very easy for a security leader who may have been fighting for budget and fighting to get airtime with the board to use that opportunity to paint the picture that, oh my God, the sky is falling, everybody's going to die if you don't give me money to keep them safe. I think we need to, as security industry experts, make sure that we are not overplaying that and are not playing the sky is falling and talking about and making sure that they do understand that, yes, this is a low probability event, but the impact is such that we do need to be prepared. And here are the things that we can do to do that, but that also help advance our security program and our business in other ways. I've had a lot of success using that, and I think others can too.
Great. So Pamela, I want to give you a chance since you were talking about it a lot in some of your answers. Anything to add to what Drew was saying?
I think, yeah, I mean, definitely what Drew said is so true. It's not always, the sky is falling, but I think one of the things that also has been beneficial at that, the C-suite and the board level is kind of aligning with those organizational goals. The same thing is it helps you in the long run if you can show how the security programs are working hand in hand to meet those broader goals at the company, so that it's not always just this situation happened and now I'm asking for more money. It's how am I aligning the security program to these broader goals? Because typically when there is a board discussion and you're in that, it is about, there's always conversations about the well-being of your employees, constituents, whoever you're there for, and also the safe work environment. So ultimately, somehow weaving that in tends to allow for them to understand that you're not just there to promote an active preparedness or an active shooter preparedness plan or, an emergency response. It is all encompassing for everything to do with security and responding on behalf of your employees, your constituents, making sure that they're safe at all times. So really one of those things that gets missed at times when you go in, especially in like an aftermath of an incident, is just remember to align that to the higher level goals. And typically they can see that benefit across the organization.
Great, thanks. So another audience question we have, and I'm going to direct this one at Eugene, because you come from that SWAT and that first responder. We have a number of questions kind of around that first responder issue and how you should be working with local law enforcement agencies now to ensure that you are ready later. So can you give some pointers, give some hints? How should that be happening? What if somebody's not doing that? Where do you tell people to start?
Well, they should definitely be reaching out to their local law enforcement, because every agency would love to be able to partner with everyone. The idea is, giving them access to see the location firsthand. Like if you look at a hospital, I mean, everyone gets lost in a hospital. And when we would train in hospitals, they'd say, oh, we're in the IC unit. Where is that? There's 5 buildings, there's 10 floors. How do you find that? So from a law enforcement's perspective, having the ability to know the layouts, so giving them floor plans and things like that are really vital. Another thing that we started instituting, especially for hospitals or bigger organizations, we would ask them to create sort of a go bag kind of situation where it would have access cards that they'd be able to hand to law enforcement, so they'd be able to access certain areas that were restricted to employees only in case of an emergency. So those kind of things, radios and stuff like that. But it's vital. You really got to make those connections. They're more than happy to come out and they'll even show you some of the vulnerabilities you might not even see that they can see right away. So it's a good opportunity for both sides.
Great. Another question. So an attendee has said that all resources are scarce. Which risk should receive higher priority, active shooter or workplace violence? Drew, you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a dynamic that we often miss. At least in my mind, they are not separate priorities. They are not separate risks. Active shooter is just a type of workplace violence. It's workplace violence taken to the extreme. All those things that we put in place to recognize workplace violence risk and deal with it can prevent active shooter incidents. Yes, there are some response pieces that are unique to active shooter, but getting, as I've said multiple times already, getting left of bang, preventing that from happening, all play into the same for workplace violence and active shooter. So I think those are one and the same.
Anything to add? Any other panelists?
I just going to agree completely. It's a component of workplace violence, and it sort of piggybacks onto how do you deal with board members and things like that when you're trying to promote these programs. If what works for me is using it all under the workplace violence umbrella and saying it's a component of it, and as such we can utilize all the same tactics and plans to address that. And it's a little easier sell when you're trying to push certain things.
Okay, we're going to ask one final audience question. The ones that we have not got to, we're going to take note of those, and we're going to try to get some answers out to you. So this final one is, do gunshot detection systems actually assist in the reduction of time in responding to the location of active assailants? And so I want to just, if you don't know the exact answer to that, there's probably studies, but I wanted to ask our panelists for their thoughts on kind of gunshot detection systems and things of that nature. Why don't we start with Eugene?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan. I'm not sold on the concept. And again, it just goes right back to what I was saying, is that a lot of organizations have multiple buildings, multiple areas, and just because they tell you, yeah, it's happening over by building 200, room 7. You don't know where that's going to be from a emergency response standpoint. Law enforcement's not really going to know, and you can direct them. But I don't know if it really. I don't know the statistics, but for me, I don't think it's for the cost. I'm not sure there's a return on that. I think there's probably better things that you could do.
Any of our other panelists want to weigh in on that? And if you have a differing opinion, Gene, it's okay to say so.
Yeah, well, I'll keep talking about it. I think that there's some really great technology right now with AI that's using existing camera systems that are able to, basically the software patch, and you're able to see where someone's coming in with the gun. You can see them live footage. You can track them and follow them. I think that's probably a better return, and I think it's a very good programs out there. There's a couple outstanding companies. Actuate is one of them. Zero Eyes is another one. Very, very good companies, and good opportunities for people to implement a very active, solution.
Any other input on that?
Yeah, I'll chime in real quick. I agree. I agree with what Gene has said. I think every one of these pieces of security technology is a tool in our toolbox. And anything we do that can improve the speed that we can identify an incident and therefore the speed at which we can respond to it is good. That said, money is limited. Nobody I know has unlimited funds for security measures. So we have to look at each one of those investments in our security program to be sure that we're getting the most bang for the buck and making sure that there aren't other things that we could spend that money on that would be more effective. And frankly, I think in most cases with gunshot detection systems, there are probably things that are going to be more effective to spend that money on and give you a better result for the amount of money you're going to spend. That's not saying that there aren't places where it could be effective and could be your best investment. But for the majority of clients I've worked with, it probably isn't.
All right, Pamela, Jean, Drew, thank you so very much for sharing your expertise. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Again, I'd like to thank Drew, Jean, Pamela, and Scott for joining us today and sharing their expertise and insights on the survey results. And thank you to Everbridge for sponsoring today's webinar. To our live attendees, we hope you enjoyed today's presentation. In a moment, our program will conclude and an evaluation will pop up. The evaluation takes less than 3 minutes to complete, so please share your thoughts about today's webinar. ASIS values your feedback as we look to schedule future programming. Thank you for attending today's presentation, and you will now be redirected to the webinar evaluation.